Hello, everybody, and welcome back to push my right buttons here, make sure everything's working. Hey, it's Jeff Diverter. Welcome back to Solve Live, everyone. So glad that you are here. Hey, and my name is Jeff Diverter. I'm the Chief Technology Evangelist here at Rackspace Technology. And, we're here every Tuesday, every Thursday, bringing you some great information. But we're here not just for you, but with you. So make sure that you introduce yourself in the comments down below. We're here for about the next 30 minutes or so, and I'm really excited today to have somebody on that I haven't had before. In fact, we're giving you a precursor. Today is September 30th, and it is the day before Cybersecurity or National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And today I have brought in Chris Hughes. Now, Chris Hughes, he's a professional's professional when it comes to security. We'll get into all of his pedigree as we get a little bit farther on, but he is well certified in all of the things that he is supposed to be certified in this space, and has the 20 years of experience to show for it. So experience and certification. Well, that's pretty amazing. Hey, Gary from the United Kingdom, so glad that you are here. Thank you so much for joining in today. As you guys know, when we go through our programs, we tend to follow a pretty similar format. And we'll start, just like always, with This Week in Cloud. And that's how the cloud is making the news and why it matters to you. Second, we'll get into a bunch of other really cool stuff as well around the releases from the cloud providers. But someone's in from the Netherlands. Robert, so glad that you're here. Welcome. We got a great showing from the EMEA region this morning. Hey guys, so there's some interesting news out of GM. Now, having a cloud-enabled car is not necessarily a new thing. If you're a Tesla owner, you're pretty aware of it. But GM has made some interesting announcements that they've got this new service that they call Altify. That sounds fancy, but that's going to be in their cars starting in 2023. Now, Altify is a cloud-based service that will bring all sorts of services, not only to the car itself, but also for those cars that also have the Altify network in it. They'll be able to communicate information between the cars, kind of one of the first I've heard about that outside of Tesla, and be able to share road hazards, driving conditions, these sorts of things with other cars in the area. All right. Hey, welcome from Houston and welcome from India. We're glad that you guys are all here. Guys, everyone else, don't forget, let's comment down below. And I want you to start getting your cybersecurity questions on. We have an amazing guest for you here today as well. Now, also in the news is Palo Alto Net recently was invited by a SaaS provider. They left that name to themselves. Probably a smart thing that they did. But Unit 42 over at Palo Alto Networks was invited in to do a red team exercise around seeing what they could find with a SaaS provider, and they found a lot. Turns out Chris, our guest here in a second, is familiar with the report, has read the report. We'll talk about it a little bit more in depth here shortly. But they ultimately found problems in a very similar place if you follow cybersecurity issues in their software supply chain. Same place where SolarWinds got into trouble earlier this year as well. And as you know, if you can inject badness into the software supply chain, which is part of how that software makes its way into the build process and ultimately into production, that those issues then permeate throughout the entire environment. So that's not good. And they did it in a relatively short amount of time. We'll talk to Chris about that a little bit more here shortly. And But that's kind of what's going on in the news. Let's now move on to what's new from our friends in the cloud providers, and we'll start with AWS. Now, AWS has QuickSight Q is now generally available. Now, this is really kind of cool natural language AI model, and what it does is it allows business owners to just ask natural language queries. Basically, you could say something like, what was the year-on-year growth of division X inside of my company? Asking it is just in general words, and up it comes with a visual interface. So it's a natural language interface to all of their data sets. So that's pretty cool. And that was been in preview, but now it's generally available. Also, from AWS is Redshift announces its next generation query editor. So this is version 2. It's a web-based interface, gives you all sorts of new tools and technology. So this is that evolution that we've been talking about so often. Hey, Parth from India, glad you're here. And everyone, big applaud to Daniel, who is posting all of these news bits and these updates in the chat. This is an interactive session, everyone. So make sure that you are, you're engaging down below. But back to this Redshift announcement. In fact, if we go back and talk about, the queue before, it's all about how do you get more value out of the stuff that you're putting into the cloud. And over, whether it's new capabilities or whether it's new regions, the cloud providers continue to build and allow you to get greater value out. I talk about these reactions of now, we're getting more out of the clouds than what we had originally put in. And that's that cloud nirvana state that we want to get into. Now, also in new releases over on the Azure front is the general availability of Azure Purview. Now, this became available, well, guess it was 2 days ago on September 28th. And now you can maximize the value of on-premise cloud software as a service and data with this unified governance solution. This is drawing in what you're running on-prem, what you're running inside of the clouds, and being able to have a unified map of all of this content, which is really pretty awesome. Now, also from Azure, now I'm putting this in because we've got a customer who is centered in Norway, and it's a pretty great company. But they're always excited when new cloud capabilities come natively to their country. So Norway East has availability zones now in general availability. So again, just like I mentioned before, these cloud providers, not just new capabilities, but new regions. We have this whole big push into the hybrid environment. In fact, you see it from all of the hyperscale cloud providers, whether it's Outpost or Anthos or Azure Stack and related technologies, of how you bring the clouds into your data center. Big reason for that was being able to get it closer to your region, closer to your data, closer to your customers. Well, more and more we find, like in Norway East, you can just stay in the native cloud provider. Let's move on to Google. Google Anthos Clusters has seen an update. This brings us greater security. Now, I'll tell you, if you know me, I can be a little bit paranoid, and I wonder if I should take the latest updates. Well, as we get into our conversation with Chris shortly, all things cybersecurity, and as I read and delve more and more into it, I tell you, I can't grab a patch of any sort fast enough and apply it to a router, to an iPhone, to a machine to help ensure that every security patch is in place. Now, also from Google is cloud load balancing has seen an update. Now you have the ability to do this not just globally, but regionally. Now, this is important for those workloads that have, geographic restrictions on it. Maybe you're working with a workload that's central to North America, maybe even in the Canada region, and that data has to stay, that PII-based data has to stay in Canada. Now you have the ability to do that with your GCP workloads, which is kind of cool. All right. Well, that's what's happening in not only in the news, but also as we talk about updates from the cloud providers themselves. And now I'm super excited to bring Chris Hughes onto the program. Now, Chris and I go back, we go back really far if you talk about our LinkedIn connections, but it's one of the first times that we've had a chance to really visit in depth as we were doing that before back in the green room, the proverbial green room here at the live production studio. And he comes with 20 years of experience in cyber and in IT. I was looking at his resume earlier today, and it's interesting to look at what he's got from an education perspective. But when you roll through the certifications, it's across every cloud and every discipline. So it's a great treat for me to get to introduce to you Mr. Chris Hughes, so we can bring him up onto the stage. And Chris, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me here. Happy to be here and chat.
Oh man, I'm glad that you're here. Now, I was talking a little bit earlier about that Unit 42, and before we get into that, why don't you tell us a little bit about the company that you helped co-found and the mission that you're on?
Yeah, so the company I recently co-founded, his name is Acquia. We focus on cybersecurity services in the federal public sector, both on the federal civilian side and DoD side, just leveraging some of my background across, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, and such, as well as at
Yeah.
FedRAMP where I worked for some time, and then also some of my partners' background in the private sector at companies like AWS and Apple.
Very cool. So experience across all of it. So that level 42 report, you're familiar with it.
Yes, yes, I am.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts there?
It's actually not surprising, but I love the content that comes out of that Unit 42 threat team. They put out a lot of great content, but they built on what we saw happen in 2020 with supply chain attacks from a software perspective. For example, they pen tested a software as a service, a SaaS provider, basically, right? And
Yeah.
as we saw with SolarWinds, there's a lot of focus on using CI/CD pipelines, right, to produce secure software that comes out of the end of that pipeline. But how about securing the pipeline itself? And what
Yeah.
that report highlighted was if you don't secure the pipeline itself, you can have that poisoned or compromised. And the interesting thing with the supply chain, as we saw with SolarWinds, is it has a cascading impact on all the consumers downstream that are leveraging that SaaS provider, for example. They also pointed out a lot of findings around infrastructure as code, misconfigurations and vulnerabilities, in public repositories for Terraform and such. And then also findings with things such as Kubernetes manifests and container images as well.
Well, now that's interesting. And it's, we spend a lot of time here kind of trying to help, not just here, but over on the Cloud Talk podcast, helping to, what I say, demystify a lot of what's happening in cybersecurity today. And as we talked earlier, when there's, I think, two big issues. First is people, I think, feel intimidated because it's become so mature and such an incredible threat. But two, there have been so many compromises lately that I feel like we're also a little bit desensitized to the fact that these are things that we can actually do. But in this, what they found in the Unit 42 group, I keep wanting to say level 42. I'm a child of the 80s, and it's a great band. So at any rate, this is the wrong band for today. But also in that Senate subcommittee report that really kind of pulled us together here today, a lot of times it's the basic stuff that gets people into trouble. You talk about manifests, you talk about, just code they're pulling off the internet and not securing. These are the basic blocking and tackling activities that people can and should be solving for. What are you seeing in that space, or recommendations you might have?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as we talked about in the green room, as you called it, there's a lot of focus on emerging technologies and things such as cloud and blockchain and quantum computing and things like that. But as this report shows, when it comes to federal agencies, it's the basics, the fundamentals that are still getting people. Lack of an asset inventory, lack of implementing MFA, not knowing where PII is or who has access to it. And that's why I always try to revert back to those, the CIS top critical security controls, for example. They're there for a reason, and they tend to stay the same over a long period of time for a reason. It's the fundamentals that adversaries are looking for. Granted, there are cases where they put a lot of work in and do some complex, really incredible activities from a malicious activity perspective, but they're looking for the low-hanging fruit. Why would they put a ton of work and thing just go out and, you have a default password, or you're lacking MFA, or you have PII exposed to the internet? Why would they, implement some kind of real novel attack if they can just use something basic and compromise you?
Right. And that's what we found in what you had posted about last, or I guess 2 weeks ago, on that federal cybersecurity report, that America's data is, in all italics, still at risk. Now, this report came out relatively recently, but it's an update to one from 2019. And so many of the findings are not the hard stuff. It's not even MFA in some cases. It's examples like federal systems still running software that's not even supported by the vendor anymore.
Yeah, that just shows the struggle in terms of IT modernization within the federal government. They're still using antiquated software that doesn't have updates from the vendor. They have no longer supported from the vendor. It shows you how much they struggle from a tech refresh perspective, just to move to modern technologies and software, for example. And it also, it highlights, it was 8 agencies that they looked at in 2019 in that report. It was federal. What was it? America's data is at risk. Here we are 2 years later. America's data is still at risk. Same 8 agencies, same findings overall for the most part. Some minor changes, but yeah, like you said, those fundamentals, lack of support software, lack of basic security hygiene is really still there, and it's still a problem.
Well, and there's tons of other examples in there, and I don't think that those 8 agencies, even anything on the federal side, is unique that you wouldn't find out on the commercial space as well. If we were to go find, 8 comparable enterprise organizations to those agencies, I'm guessing we'd find numbers that are similar to what you find in those agencies.
Yeah, I definitely suspect that's the case. The reality is like most federal large enterprises, the size of some of, Department of Homeland Security, the Social Security Administration, those large organizations, if you found enterprises like that on the commercial side, they don't have inspector generals poking around and producing reports on their security posture, for example. But yes, it's likely very the same. The struggle of integrating security in throughout the life cycle. Having security be a seat at the table from a executive perspective. The problems are likely pervasive.
Right. And it's problems like you just mentioned, it's the, running antiquated software or not knowing where all the data is, not knowing where all the servers are. We're over here at Rackspace. And again, this isn't a commercial for Rackspace, but we have the opportunity here to touch literally hundreds of thousands of customers. And we help them migrate from point A to point B all the time. And that migration always starts with discovery. Let's put some tooling in place and go figure out what's there, because you know what? There's no inventory that can be provided that is exhaustive. So we go do that, and we'll uncover generally 20% of what we uncover. People are going, "I thought we turned that off 5 years ago," or
Yep.
some such.
Yeah, it's definitely a common problem we've seen in legacy, traditional environments. The asset inventory has been a longstanding issue, and then you look to the cloud, and it's even worse now. Like, because look at like a SaaS perspective in a big enterprise, you can be consuming so much SaaS across so many business units, you don't even know what's being used, where your data is, who has access to it. And then we're here talking about cloud, for example, and then managed service providers like Rackspace. For a lot of organizations that lack comprehensive IT and cybersecurity skill sets, it makes a lot of sense to lean into the cloud provider, lean into that MSP, let them do what they're great at, so you can focus on your core competencies and delivering value to your customer.
Well, and I'll call it the old days. Let's take it back. You could even say 2015. Let's go farther back, 2010. And a new tech would come along, and you could go find a couple of folks inside of the organization and say, "Hey, go get smart in this new version of Windows. Go get smart in the latest distribution of Linux, and let's figure out if that could be helpful inside of our organization and put a proof of concept in place, and let's go run with it." Which is great and all, because it gives people some opportunity. But when you start doing things at scale, like you mentioned, part of the issues over at that unnamed SaaS provider was a bunch of manifest issues on their Kubernetes side. I can rewind that conversation, Chris, and here's what I hear. Hey, somebody go get smart in Kubernetes. Hey, I watched a webinar. I'll go take the online class from such and such from Google. And all of a sudden, now they're going into production. And it's not that these people can't learn this stuff, but we're throwing them into the deep end of the pool. Not just the deep end of the pool, it's the side of the pool at SeaWorld where all the sharks are.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what you're talking about also highlights a workforce challenge that many organizations have.
Yeah.
The idea of attracting and retaining tech talent. And then also the folks that they do have oftentimes are so burdened with just daily operational activities that they don't have time to go dig in and become a Kubernetes SME, for example, or a cloud security SME. Right. So it's definitely a workforce challenge that's at play as well.
Hey, Heather, welcome from Canada. But, it highlights an issue as well. And that's not necessarily that you shouldn't give your workforce challenges, because that is a part of how you retain them. But it doesn't mean that you can't still bring somebody alongside. And that's kind of that changing face of managed service providers as well. We've seen some changes that we've done here at Rackspace, but it's all about how do you engage with a service provider who can come in and help you in that kind of just-in-time space and for just long enough, I would say as well, because you shouldn't necessarily be engaging with somebody that doesn't provide value in the long term, but boy, there's huge value in the short term, and write in employee cross-training into that statement of work so that you're able to own it in the long term.
Yeah, definitely. You're looking for a trusted partner that can come help you along the journey of your modernization efforts, and it may be an outside consultancy or something, or maybe a managed service provider or a cloud service offering. It could be a mix of all those things. And as you mentioned, there's also the reality that, as far as supply chain risk management, your managed service provider and your cloud provider also can present risk. So you need to do your due diligence and find a good managed service provider, a good CSP that has the certifications, the past performance and things like that, so they don't introduce undue risk into your environment too.
Well, and let's kind of poke at and shine a light on Acquia here for a second as well, because while we talk about these service providers like a Rackspace at the scale that we are, or others that have offerings, you think about a Deloitte, or you think about Accenture, other companies like that, in those broad armies that can come to bear. But there's great value in the strategic as well. So and very pinpoint type of a thing, whether that's getting in and doing some really deep work in the data space and bring in data experts who can not only help you transform there, but get into the security aspect as well. Or somebody like a company like you guys, where you can come in and really help evolve not just a DevOps practice, but a DevSecOps practice. In fact, maybe you can talk about that just a little bit and what you guys do in that space.
Yeah, definitely. We're working in the public sector at the moment and at some federal agencies focused on key things such as application security maturity, threat modeling, DevSecOps, as you mentioned, leveraging my background within the federal domain as well as my partners in the commercial space and our team. We bring a very niche expertise to the table. We're not one of those major, big four consulting firms or a traditional like defense industrial based vendor, for example, who can augment your staff and stay there for long periods of time. We're coming in with a very unique opportunity to help you identify things you can improve on, tackle those, and empower your team to move on and handle it themselves as well. We're not trying to stay entrenched, for forever. Essentially, we're coming in to help augment your team, help you reach your goals, and then move on and let you be successful. And we're leveraging our background both in the federal side as well as the commercial space to do that.
Excellent. And you want to look for folks with this level of experience and a track record in the space who have, we talk about security, people who have seen the changes of the past 10 or 15 years or 15 months more specifically, and help to thwart that stuff, and has a voice in the marketplace as well. I mean, Chris, you just wrote an interesting article as it related back to some of the stuff that's going on. Jen Easterly even commented on some of it. Maybe you can talk real quickly about that, and Daniel can post it in the chat as well and make it available for everyone else.
Yeah, I would love to. So we all know that we saw the federal cybersecurity executive order come out in May of this year, actually. And it produced some aggressive timelines and some requests for agencies, right? Among those requests was the goal for CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency, to produce a cloud security reference architecture. And they collaborated with other agencies to do that. And they recently released that, and it was about 45 pages or so, if I recall. And I kind of, point out some of the great things it talked about in terms of moving towards zero trust, implementing DevSecOps. But it also spent nearly half of the document covering some things that should be very routine and fundamental knowledge at this point when it comes to cloud computing, discussing what FedRAMP is and discussing what a cloud is, different cloud service models. And that was almost half the document. And that's problematic because it shows you just how far the federal government still has to go on that cloud journey, that cloud security journey. It also talks about a good bit about cloud security posture management, which is great. We know that cloud security is key, and getting CSPMs in place to look at your AWS environment, your IaaS type environments is great. We see so many misconfigurations with buckets and things of that nature, which get a lot of people. But that said, there's no focus on SaaS governance, in my opinion, SaaS security posture management. We know like most organizations are using, 1 to 3 IaaS providers, the big 3, Google, Amazon, and Azure, for example. But they may be using 10 to hundreds of SaaS providers. They often don't even know what SaaS providers they have in use, who has access to them, where their data is. And that's something I highlighted in my critique of the report as well. As well as some of the workforce challenges, honestly. Some of the goals that the federal government laid out in that document and other EO kind of tasks that they put out are going to be a real challenge given the workforce challenge that they have of attracting and retaining tech talent. They're going to need to partner with MSPs, CSPs, consultants who have the niche expertise to help them be successful, as well as upskilling in the existing workforce and changing some of the hiring practices to bring in that kind of expertise that they need to be successful too.
Yeah. So, when I read through the document and you look at it, especially if you just go look at the table of contents, it's a great framework. I was really pleased to see how they laid it all out. I think it's a model that if your organization doesn't necessarily know how to approach this systematically, it's a great model that can be approached and just fill in the blanks for what makes sense in your organization. But I really do think that there were three big issues that caught my attention. The first were the timelines. The timelines weren't somebody's been in IT for almost 25 years, not realistic in any stretch of the imagination. We also don't necessarily know who's accountable in a lot of those different individual areas. The second is knowing that the timelines aren't appropriate because the amount of work is gargantuan. It's absolutely it's a tsunami of work that has to be done, and nowhere in there do we talk about how we're going to fund that work, because all of these agencies already have a full docket of what they need to do that are funded for specific things. And funding in the federal government in the United States, if you're paying attention, is a fickle little thing, and we're about to run out of it here, it looks like, for a little while. But then the third piece of that is the fact that this executive order from the executive branch of the U.S. government, covering all the branches, areas, and essentially, and all these different agencies. These agencies aren't necessarily known for their cooperation with other agencies, but this is a blanket cooperation document. So the consistency, I think, is going to be really challenging to pull off.
That's right. I mean, you highlighted so many good things about it. It does have a lot of great things in the EO and things that they're trying to pursue and achieve. But a question is authority, accountability, as you mentioned, and funding. These organizations are already bogged down with existing, IT goals and initiatives, cybersecurity tech debt that they're trying to tackle as it is. There's not a lot of funding basically to go out and achieve some of these things. So they may have to look to things to cut, have some rationalization of existing, initiatives underway to reallocate funding to achieve some of these things. Take a look at who's supporting them. Are your, the vendors supporting them capable of helping them achieve what they're trying to achieve based on that executive order too? Right. So it's a lot to unpack. And as you mentioned, lack of collaboration can really get them, because it's going to have a lot of silos of rework and people doing things without communicating and collaborating. And that could be really detrimental.
Yeah, bureaucracies can be hard to organize and get everybody on the same, marching towards the same end goal. Now, Chris, here on the program, usually we end with a "What's on your mind" section, and I'm gonna, and I kind of just would normally give it to the guest to say whatever they want, but I'm actually going to give you a little bit more direction in this context. Something we talked about earlier, and that is, with all of these challenges in cyber, and all of the quite literally armies lined up against organizations and nations, what can companies do? I think what we kind of talked about earlier is blocking and tackling is kind of a key thing. But from one security expert yourself to the rest of the world, what's your advice on what's the best way to get a good defensive posture up?
Yeah, honestly, it comes full circle to how we started the conversation, which is taking a look at the fundamentals and seeing if you're doing the fundamentals right before you jump too far to some really complex initiatives. Are we doing the basics right? Do we even know what we have in our environment from a hardware and software perspective? Do we know where our data is? Do we know who has access to it? Are we implementing, basic things to implement, like MFA, for example, to make things harder for adversaries? These are all key things that organizations can do to implement and improve their cybersecurity hygiene really quickly. And then also, take a look at your existing workforce. Are we capable of doing what we need to do? And if not, who can we partner with? Who can we hire? Those kind of things. Who can we lean into from a managed service provider, cloud service provider perspective? What would be the value of that? Those are all key things you can do to get up to speed and improve your security posture pretty quickly.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. And I think the last thing I might even add to that is start today. It's not too late. You're late to the game. Let's admit it. Everybody's a little bit late to the game. But get something done today. Get the process started today. Get that inventory done. Lock up those holes. Find them. Patch your systems. If you've got systems that aren't patched, patch your systems. If you've got systems, we all do, that are running antiquated versions of operating systems, let's make some changes. Let's get away from those. They have holes you could drive a truck through. All right, Chris. Hey, thanks so much for taking some time with us here this morning. This has been a great chat, and I really appreciate you taking the time. People want to find you on the line. Now, obviously, we've linked to your LinkedIn article that you wrote, that you talked about, but how can people find you?
Definitely LinkedIn. I'm super active on LinkedIn around anything cloud, cybersecurity, DevSecOps, cybersecurity leadership, all those kind of topics I'm really passionate about, and I'm active on LinkedIn on. And then you can also find us on our website at acquia.us, AQUIA.us.
All right. Thanks so much, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday. If you're in from India or even the UK, you're getting close to the end of the day, or you're already there. So enjoy it and have a great Friday tomorrow. Everyone will be back on Tuesday with another amazing guest. We're so glad that you have taken the time to be a part of this conversation this morning. Chris, thanks again.